I just want to welcome you very warmly to our retreat today. Thank you so much for carving out this time and this space in your own diaries for us to journey together. So just a big word of thanks to each of you. Perhaps I need to say right at the outset of our journey together that I have two hoped-for outcomes for our time together. That on the one hand, I'm really hoping that today you will be able to pause a while. That today you'll be able to slow down a bit. That today you will stop. I think we've lost the art of stopping today. And I think the consequences are tragic with regard to our life of faith and our life with God. I never forget teaching my kids. I've got two kids, one girl, one boy. I'll never forget teaching them how to drive. And I'll always remember my very first lesson that I gave to them. And I need to say that it gave me an imminent sense of eternity. But I remember what I said to them in the car when we climbed into the car. I said to both of them in that very first lesson, the first thing you need to know about this car is how to stop it. And I think we need to rediscover, as it were, recover the art of stopping, as it were, in the traffic of our own lives. I dare to say that if we don't learn to stop, if we don't discover this art of stopping, I really doubt whether we will live our daily lives with a deep consciousness of God's presence and activity. Jesus needed to stop. And so do we. And so do we. So that's my one hopeful outcome, that through today, there will be times when you're able to push that pause button, slow down, and stop. I have another hoped-for outcome. I'm hoping that as we journey together through the day, I'm hoping that each one of us will be able to take a tiny step into the deepening of our own friendship with the Trinity. I think it was Richard Foster many years ago in his book Celebration of Discipline, when he said superficiality is the curse of our age. And one of the greatest needs of our age is for people who have got depth. Well, I'm hoping that somehow today we will take a step into greater depths in terms of our own relationship with God. And the way that I want us to do that, this is the way I want us to do it. I want us to build our retreat around 5 sentences that I've taken from the writings of Dallas Willard. And I need to say very quickly, please do not hold Dallas responsible for what I say about his sentences. But I want his sentences to be, as it were, springboards for our own prayer, for our own reflection, for our own meditation. The very first sentence that I want us to look at comes, in fact, I think most probably from his most important book, Christian book that he wrote, The Divine Conspiracy. It was a great privilege that while he was writing that book, I lived in South Africa then. I still live in South Africa. But he would send chapters through whenever he finished them, and he invited feedback and conversation, which I must say I found quite daunting. But I remember reading in the very first few pages of The Divine Conspiracy this wonderful, wonderful sentence. And I want you to take a careful look at it. It's going to come up on the screens, and you may want to write it down so it's in front of you. Dallas wrote these words: "We are invited to make a pilgrimage into the heart and life of God." We are invited to make a pilgrimage into the heart and the life of God. Now, I wonder whether you've ever had that invitation extended to you. In your many years, perhaps, of going to church, or your many years even perhaps of following Christ, have you ever been presented with that invitation? That invitation to go on a pilgrimage, an eternal pilgrimage into the heart, into the life of God. So what I'm going to do, and I'm going to do this with each of the talks through the day, I'm going to just make 3 simple observations around each sentence that gets given to us. And I'm sure that you will have other thoughts about these sentences, but I'm sharing with you the thoughts that these sentences have been generated within myself. I want you to notice from that sentence, I want you to notice the invitational nature of our faith. We are invited. We are invited. The Christian faith is profoundly invitational. A great scholar from your own country, he died a few years ago, Euston Smith, a student of world religion, gave his life to the study of world religions, in fact ended up as a Christ follower. He makes the observation after studying world religions that one of the real distinctives of Christian faith is its invitational nature. That God doesn't force anything upon us. That in fact, when you read, for example, the Gospels and you follow Jesus through the Gospels, have you noticed that there are invitations all over the place? Follow me. Come with me. Take my yoke upon yourself. Pick up your cross. These are invitations. These are invitations. And you will know that invitations really need to be received. They need to be opened up. They need to be explored. And they always come. Every invitation comes with an RSVP. I've often thought about the tragedy of unopened invitations in our lives. Invitations that God has given us that kind of just have got lost in the rush of life. I remember a moment, one of the things I really loved doing when I was an active pastor, I loved preparing people for marriage. I really loved doing it. Used to spend 6 to 8 weeks with them in conversation, and then the rehearsal about a week or two before the wedding. But I remember this one particular couple. I did the rehearsal. They came back into the office to do a few things, and as they walked out the door, the guy just put an envelope on my desk, and he walked out. Anyway, the following Saturday, married the couple. After the marriage service, I took a walk while the photographs were being taken. I took a walk around the marriage venue. It was beautiful, magnificent. Chandeliers, band, waiters, champagne. It wasn't a Methodist a wedding. Lots of good champagne. And I thought to myself, if only I could, enjoy this moment. If only Debbie and we could dance all night. And anyway, I went home. I told Debbie about this wedding and told her about the venue and about the beautiful banquet that had been laid out for the couple. And the following week, I'll never forget this. The following week, sitting in my office, I see this envelope that this guy had just put on my desk. I had forgotten all about it. It had got lost in all the kind of mess that's usually on my desk. Opened it up, and you can guess, it was an invitation to the banquet. The tragedy, as I like to call it, the tragedy of an unopened invitation. And for me, that's been a parable that I can go through life. I can go through my life with God, and on the table of my life, as it were, invitations that Christ has given me that I just haven't bothered to open. And so I'm really hoping that today on this retreat, we're going to be opening up a few invitations. And I'm really hoping and praying that maybe you will discern which invitation has your name written on it. I doubt whether every invitation will have your name written on it, but maybe there will be one. And I'm hoping that you will receive that invitation, that you will open it up, explore it, and say yes. I'd like to accept. So that's the first thing I notice about the sentence. Will you notice this? That we are invited to make a pilgrimage. A pilgrimage. That's a very, very important word. Let me tell you why. When you read the New Testament, you will notice that the early Christ followers did not call themselves Christians. It's a very important observation. The early Christ followers did not call themselves Christians. It was a name that was given to them. They saw themselves as, and I'm going to quote here, as people of the way. People of the way. They were people who were on the way of Jesus. They were following Jesus. So when we speak of pilgrimage, maybe we need to be careful here. We're not thinking so much of a kind of physical journey to do the Camino. That obviously comes to mind. But we're thinking of something a little bit more internal, something in terms of our own relationship with Christ, our own following of Christ. That when he comes to us, as he came to his early disciples, he speaks to us the same words he spoke to them. He says to us, follow me. We become people of the way. we begin to follow him. We go on a pilgrimage, and it's an eternal pilgrimage. It's an eternal pilgrimage. I wonder whether you would see yourself as a pilgrim along the way of Jesus. I don't know about you, but I just love that description. Called, invited to be a pilgrim along the way of Jesus. It was Eugene Peterson who drew a very sharp distinction between pilgrims and tourists. It's a very helpful distinction. And he says, he observes in his book, I think it's A Long Obedience in the Same Direction, he makes the observation that our congregations are filled with religious tourists, not pilgrims. And for him, he has clear distinctions. Tourists kind of, they dabble in a bit of Christian faith now and then when it suits them. Pilgrims are on that pilgrimage of a long obedience in the same direction. There's a difference. The tourist dabbles. The pilgrim is wholeheartedly on pilgrimage. The tourist, Eugene Peterson observes, often is a consumer of attractions, a consumer. The religious tourist is often consuming. The pilgrim is someone who participates, who's actually taking the journey, not simply consuming, as it were, religious goods. Tourism, religious tourism, is often very individualistic. Pilgrims go on pilgrimage together. We follow Jesus along the way together. That, as it were, when we open up this invitation from Christ, and when we, as it were, open up our life to Christ, he always brings his family with him that we go on pilgrimage with. So I want to invite you to see your own life with Christ as an eternal pilgrimage, as an eternal pilgrimage. And the last observation that I want to make is that it is a pilgrimage. It's not aimless. It's not aimless. It has a certain direction. And that sentence beautifully describes the direction of the pilgrimage. We are invited on a pilgrimage into the heart and the life of God. On the one hand, we're invited on a pilgrimage into the heart of God. And we're going to see today that heart is a compassionate heart. And that when I go on that pilgrimage into the compassionate heart of God, I begin to participate as a pilgrim in that compassion. It rubs off on me. I begin to see people, as it were, through the eyes of God. I begin to see people as precious image bearers. I begin to see people as thous, not as its, as subjects, not as objects. I begin to participate in the compassion of God as I journey into God's compassionate heart. And I too You as well. We all do. We become ourselves recipients of that compassion in our own life as well. It becomes a gift to us. And then on the other hand, it's a pilgrimage into the heart of God. It's a pilgrimage into the life of God. And this is really what the good news of Jesus is all about. The good news of Christ is about the offer of another kind of life, God's kind of life. And it's a life that is multi-layered with meaningfulness. That as we enter into the life of God, we enter into a shared life of ever-deepening friendship with the Trinity. That as we enter into the life of God, we enter into a transformed life in which God is gradually changing us on the inside into the people that God wants us to be. That it's an empowered life. It's an empowered life in which I discover a new power source within my own life. The indwelling presence of God, God's self, as my life, my body becomes a temple of God's Spirit. There's a release of new power. Power over evil within myself. Power to overcome evil around us with good. A power that often meets me in my places of deepest weakness and struggle. A power that meets me when I'm at the end of my rope. It's an empowered life. And it's an unshakable life. It's an unshakable life. That as I journey into God's heart, as I begin to discover for myself the reality that I'm loved by a great love, a Trinitarian love, a personal love that will never ever let me go. Never, never. And from which nothing can ever separate me. When I begin to find my identity as a human being in that love, I find myself living in an unshakable kingdom. An unshakable kingdom. And there's a sense that my life is being built on a rock and not on sand. So that's the sentence, friends, with three very simple thoughts. The Christian faith, profoundly invitational. An invitation to become a pilgrim along the way of Jesus. A pilgrimage deeply into the heart and the life of God. So what I'm going to ask you to do, if you don't mind, is we're going to take about 5 minutes of quiet just to ponder the sentence, with our mind, to think about the sentence, think carefully about it, but also to ponder the sentence with your heart. How does this invitation to become a pilgrim along the way into God's heart and life, how does that land in my heart today? What gets evoked within my heart when I allow that sentence to really, really touch me? And so we're going to just reflect on that for a while, and then perhaps together we can enter into some conversation around it. So God bless you, friends.